Did you know that mishandling prohibited content or violating software licenses can land your company in legal trouble? As an IT support technician, you need to know how to handle sensitive data, enforce corporate policies, and comply with licensing agreements. In this video, we'll show you how to respond to incidents, manage licenses, and protect regulated data like PII and PCI. Ready to become the guardian of your company's digital integrity? Let's dive in. Prohibited content handling, privacy, licensing, and corporate policy concepts. In this part, we'll look at how to deal with prohibited content, licenses, and corporate policy concepts. Incident response. Let's start with incident responses. In your job as an IT technician, you may witness prohibited activities in the company. Take, for example, the case of users engaging in prohibited activities. The extent to which this event can cause damage to your business will depend in part on the speed of your response to the incident. This is because a structured incident response policy significantly increases the chances of minimizing damage. Let's take a look at how to structure responses to these incidents. It has three crucial elements: identification of the problem, reporting to the appropriate persons, preservation of evidence. Problem identified. Let's start with the identification of the problem. Problem identification consists of identifying which policies or laws prohibit a particular action. Prohibited activities generally fall into the following categories: harassment of people, moral, sexual, violence, etc., promotion of harassment, promotion of illegal or unauthorized activities, promotion of racism, hatred, bigotry, etc., violation of privacy rights, copyrights, etc., viruses or malware of any kind, solicitation of personal information from anyone under the age of 18. This list may be different from company to company. Report to the appropriate people. Now that you've identified the problem, let's take a look at how to report it. If the violation is only a matter of company policy, the company's HRM department is usually the appropriate department to turn to. If it is a violation of a law, you should contact the legal authorities, also informing the appropriate internal resources. In short, always report to the appropriate parties, as outlined by your organizational security policy. Preservation of evidence. You should not only report the problem, you should also protect the evidence. In cases where there is evidence of foul play or industrial espionage, data preservation is of paramount importance. This may require requisitioning any device, from a flash drive to a network server. And this is until someone in a position of authority relieves you of responsibility. Documentation. Now let's move on to the documentation. Comprehensive documentation is your ally. During the entire process, you should document all the steps you take to identify, detect, and report the problem. You can write the information on a piece of paper or take pictures in the moment. This information is valuable and will be used if the issue were to be brought to court. Traceability chain. Now let's move on to another concept, the chain of custody. This is an important concept to keep in mind when working in incident response. This is because when you start collecting evidence, you need to keep track of that evidence at all times. The evidence must always be in your custody, and you must be able to see if it has been falsified. You must therefore fill out the documentation form completely, as any error or gap will render the evidence inadmissible. Sign for everything you take possession of and get the signatures of those to whom you have transferred ownership. This is very important because any shortcomings in this process can be interpreted as corruption. Licenses DRM EULA. Let's move on this time to the DRM and EULA licenses of the software. A software license is a legal document governing the use or redistribution of software. The software licenses we're going to look at today are Digital Rights Management, DRM, End User License Agreements, EULAS, Open Source versus Commercial Licenses, and Personal License versus Corporate Licenses, Digital Rights Management, DRM. We'll start with Digital Rights Management, DRM. Digital rights management is an access control technology that restricts the use of proprietary hardware. Digital rights management technologies control the use, modification, and distribution of copyrighted works. An example of DRM is limiting the number of systems that can use an application at the same time. For Microsoft Office 365, for example. End User License Agreements, EULA. Let's move on to End User License Agreements, EULAS this time. An End User License Agreement is a legal contract between a software vendor and the user of the software. A EULA details the rights and restrictions that apply to the use of the software. Open source versus commercial licenses. Now, let's look at the difference between open source and commercial licenses. Open source software is a type of computer software in which the source code is released under a license. The author grants the rights to use, study, modify, and distribute the software to anyone and for any purpose, including sometimes for sale. The Linux operating system is an example of open source software that is available in a variety of system distributions. On the other hand, commercial computer software is computer software that is produced for sale or used for commercial purposes. Microsoft Windows, Apple Mac OS, and Adobe Creative Cloud are examples of commercial software. Personal versus corporate licenses. And finally, let's now look at the terms personal and corporate licenses. A personal license is an option for individuals who purchase a software license solely for their own use. Essentially, these licenses limit the use of the software to one or a very small number of computers in the same household. On the other hand, a corporate license allows unlimited use of the product throughout the company, although certain limitations and restrictions may apply. This eliminates the need to register software every time it is installed on a new device. Data regulation. Let's move on this time to another point, data regulations. Some types of data require special attention because they are regulated. This means that their proper handling is specified by regulation. We will look at the 4 types of data that are regulated and that must be protected by network administrators. Let's start with personal identification information, PII. Personally identifiable information is any information relating to an identifiable individual. For example, name, address, driver's license number, social security number, etc. It is therefore important to protect this personal information held by your company. Let's move on to the Standard of Payment by Card, PCI, Payment Card Industry. The payment card industry, PCI, has set these standards to protect credit card information during transmission. And it's all about protecting clients from fraud. Now let's look at the GDR standard. The GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation implemented by the European Union, EU. This standard controls the collection, sharing, and storage of personal information. And finally, let's move on to the protection of health information. PHI, Protected Health Information, is a U.S. law regarding all information about a person's health status. This information is protected by the government through the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, which imposes strict penalties for security breaches. Hospitals, doctors' offices, medical staff, and other entities must comply with HIPAA regulations. Security policies and practices. Now let's move on to the last point, corporate policies and security practices. Every company must, in fact, have a security policy that governs all security-related activities. This security policy is a document that every user must sign when hiring and serves as a detailed contract between the user and the company.